Welcome to part 4 in this series of videos on creating a Blazor application using Syncfusion controls and Dapper. So far we've seemed to have done quite a lot of work, but we've actually got very little to show for it. This part is when we start actually creating the application and showing some data. So we'll be adding a Syncfusion DataGrid to the application uh, and enhancing it to allow sorting, resizing of columns, filtering of data, and adding a right-click context menu. We're going to start by replacing the existing index page with a Syncfusion DataGrid that's going to simply list the records in the countries table, and we're going to show the ID of the country and the country name. So we'll start off by opening index.razor and removing the existing code. I've already got the code I want in Notepad, so I'll copy and paste that in and then explain what's happening. So a Blazor page basically consists of these declarations at the top, some HTML and some C# code. So we're going to be using the countries, the Blazor countries.data, the namespace, and we're going to be using the countries service, so we're going to inject that into the page. We're going to give it a heading, an H3 heading, countries list, and we're going to give the Syncfusion DataGrid is this section here. So we define it with SF grid and we give it a data source, which is countries, which is down here. We'll come to that in a second. Then we say this is the columns section from here down to here, and then we define the individual columns. We're going to have two. One column we're going to use the country ID. That's the field we're going to get. We're going to give it a header text of country ID, so that'll appear at the top row of the grid, and we want the text aligned on the left, and we're going to have a width of 20. I think the width is just relative. I can't find any definitive width, so I think it's just the comparison of the width here with this width down here. So that's that column. The second column is country name. We want a header text to say name. We also want it assigned to the left, and we want a lot more width for this than we want the ID. In the C# code section, we're going to have an IEnumerable of countries. So that's this item up here. So that provides the data source. I have found that if you're using Dapper, you have to use IEnumerable here rather than IQueryable or any other variation. And the on initialized async simply gets uses the country service to get the data. So it's then awaiting the get all, which is the name of the procedure we've got in the country service. So if we have a look at country service, so here it is, the public async task enumerable countries get all. This was created by the code from Alan Simpson. So it creates an IEnumerable countries. Looks like his code has added an extra S to the end of country, so I'll just delete that. So it's using the SQL connection and then using the stored procedure get all and returning countries. So if we save this and let's build it. That's succeeded. Let's try running it. So here it is. Here's our countries list with a heading of country ID and country name. Um, at this stage, we haven't got any data. So what I've already got SQL open, and just to provide some data for this for our testing here, I'm going to manually add some records into the database directly. So if you haven't already got it open, open SQL Server Management Studio, select Databases, Countries DB, Tables, and select Countries, right-click, and select Edit Top 200 Rows. Don't worry, we're not going to add 200. Make the columns wider so you can actually type in them. You don't need to enter anything in country ID, but just put something in country name. And then press Tab. And put a few countries in here. That'll probably be enough for now. Just close that. And if we go back to our code again and refresh, we've got a list of countries. One of the things you might notice is that the records are shown not in alphabetical country name sequence, but in descending country ID sequence. This is a consequence of the stored procedure created by Alan Simpson's code. And if we look at that, so I've opened up SQL Management Server, SQL Server Management Studio, open programmability, and found the stored procedure countries get all. If we select modify, we'll see down here that the actual select statement is select country ID, country name from countries, ordered by country ID descending. We can change that here and it will have an effect on the results in our Syncfusion application or Blazor application. So if I change that to country name, and it'll be ascending by default, but there's no harm in actually specifying ascending. If I execute that now and go back to the application, I think all I need to do is actually just refresh it. And now we get the country list in country name ID. Sorry, that should be country name descending. This is about as basic a grid as it's possible to get, but it's very straightforward using the Syncfusion controls to enhance it quite considerably. So if we go back to the code, stop it running, we can change it by adding attributes to the SF grid section here. So I've already got something copied, ready to paste in. So I'll paste in the extra bits that we need. And what I've done here is to the SF grid, I've added allow sorting equals true, which will allow us to sort by any column. Allow resizing equals true, and that will allow us to change the width of the various columns. Allow filtering equals true. This will add a line or row at the top of the grid where we can put in filtering criteria. Allow paging equals true. This will allow, if we've got a lot of records, to page through the page through the records rather than having just one very long list. This is, if this is set, then you also need to tell the system what the page size is by using grid page settings. And I've set it to 5 records. I've also added allow reordering equals true. Now, reordering and sorting sounds a bit confusing, but what sorting allows is the actual sorting of the records. The reordering allows the changing of position of the columns. Okay, so let's see how this works. So we've now got paging, and we're only showing the first 5 records here because we said the paging size was 5. We can go to the next page backwards and forwards using the video controls here. We've said we'd allow sorting. So I'm sorting by country name. If I wanted to sort by country ID, I just click on the heading. You'll see now it's sorted by country ID. We've also allowed filtering. So if I type in something like SW, press carriage return, it's filtered to only those countries beginning with SW, or if I type in S and return, it'll select just those countries beginning with S, and if I delete everything, it'll reset everything back again. Reordering is just accomplished by clicking on the column headings and dragging it to the new position. That's it for this part. So we'll go back to the code and stop the application. One of the really nice features of the Syncfusion DataGrid is the context menu. This can be accessed by right-clicking. For example, if you right-click in the column headers, you can sort and auto-fit the columns. By right-clicking in the body, it's possible to copy to the clipboard or to export the data to Excel or CSV. And by right-clicking in the footer, the paging options are available. Now, to do this, we need to give there are a number of different steps, but the first step is to give the grid a reference. So I'll just say @ref, and you give it a name. I'm just going to call this first grid. And in the code section, we need to refer to that or declare it. So private SF grid countries. First grid. And in the definition of the SF grid up here, there's quite a lot to add, so I'll just copy that from Notepad. So we're saying, first of all, because we're choosing to export to Excel, we say allow export Excel export equals to true. And then these are the context menu items. It's a list of objects. We're going to auto fit all, sort ascending, sort descending, copy, Excel export, CSV export, and then the paging options, first page, previous page, last page, and next page. And lastly, we just need to add the code down here that permits the export to Excel. And as always, I'm just going to save it and build. Looks okay. Let's run it. And if we right click in the body, you can see we can either copy or export to Excel or CSV. If I right click in the headers, I can auto fit the columns of sort ascending or descending. And if I right click in the footer, I can go to the first, previous, last and next pages. That concludes this part of the video. The next stage will be to add the ability to add, delete and edit countries.